It may be the Dynasty offseason, but a rebuilder's work is never done. Well, until they eventually get out of the rebuild and start competing. So to help keep you guys busy, I got some moves to make for rebuilding teams in the offseason. As always, I do hope y'all enjoy the video. Please leave a like if you do. Comment down below your thoughts on the video itself. As rebuilding teams, what are you doing in your leagues right now? And what questions do you have about rebuilding in the offseason? If you enjoy videos like this and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to the channel and don't miss a thing. But with all that said, let's get right to the content you came for. Now, regardless of whether you've had your rookie drafts or not so far this offseason, be diligent about taking inventory of what players on your team don't fit your team trajectory. Your rebuilding team, you know that. What players don't fit your team beyond that 1 to 2 year window of your rebuild? Once you've isolated those players, be sure to look for avenues to get those players off of your team. Go scan the league and see what competitive teams are in need of a aging running back, wide receiver, or tight end, or even a quarterback if it's super flex. Now, keep in mind, moving them at this point in the offseason, you might not yield the best return, seeing that you'll sell them for the most when there's an emphasized need once they have to start setting lineups for the regular season. But being in tune with what your league mates' team needs are at this point in the offseason can help facilitate a trade easier and more efficiently down the road. Moving on to the next point, but playing off of the previous point, despite what you might think, wide receivers don't actually play forever. I know, shocking information. As good as wide receivers are in the longevity they provide us in fantasy and dynasty fantasy football in particular, the wheels will fall off the bus eventually. The cliff will come. Father Time will win. And so will you, as long as you're getting out on these guys at the appropriate times. If you're in a rebuild and you have wide receivers that are aged 29 to 30 and you believe that they're going to outlast the time span of your rebuild, it might be time to reevaluate that thought process. Over the past 13 seasons, there have been 21 wide receiver ones aged 30 or older. And in that same time span, there were 20 additional wide receiver twos that were aged 30 or older. And just for reference, in that same time span, the amount of wide receiver ones there were 14 29-year-olds, 18 28-year-olds, 23 27-year-olds, and 23 26-year-olds. And the list kind of goes back down as you get younger and younger, which makes sense. It shows the ebb and flow of a wide receiver lifespan. Meanwhile, when you look at the wide receiver 2 part of the chart I have in front of me that may or may not be on the screen by the time of this video, there were 20 30 or older wide receiver 2s since 2010 in the last 13 seasons, 14 29-year-old wide receiver 2s, 15 28-year-old wide receiver 2s, 16 27-year-old wide receiver 2s, 15 26-year-old wide receiver 2s, so on and so forth. So you could be led to believe, and understandably so, that as these wide receivers age, they're far more likely to be a wide receiver 2 than they are a wide receiver 1. Wide receiver 2s can be helpful, but when there's a clear tapering off of wide receivers after the age of 27, and again, not every wide receiver needs to turn in wide receiver 1 numbers in order to be valuable, but when they're not going to do that for you when you need them to, and you can get a good value return for these guys right now, you should. This might seem obvious, but just in case it doesn't, at this point in 2023, if you are a rebuilding team, guys you should absolutely be prioritizing moving off of include Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, Mike Evans, and DeAndre Hopkins. Again, not necessarily right now, but you will want to move these guys before the season ends, no later than the trade deadline, because the second you miss out on moving them now, it's very likely that after the season ends again, like these guys' value has already tanked because rookies are the cool new thing, you're going to miss out on some serious value if you don't incentivize moving these guys as soon as possible. Of course, in any rebuild, along with checking in on the needs of my league mates, I'm going to check in on the needs of my own team. Now, as a general rule in a rebuild, all you need for your team is valuable assets. Whether it's players, whether it's picks, you don't need to worry necessarily about positional lineup filling or anything like that, at least in my opinion. I'd much rather maintain my assets and deal them out as I want to and as I believe in most efficiently, as opposed to trying to field the most competitive lineup, adding players that I don't necessarily believe in or want to add. I'd rather just spend the assets how I want to, when I want to. But for the sake of the exercise, what boxes can I check off in my rebuild? Do I have my tight end one of the future? How's my quarterback room look? And what about my wide receiver room? Running back will obviously be my last focus in a rebuild, and that's always my recommendation. Worry last about running backs, especially more and more every day. We are being shown and told that running back volatility is insane. So ultimately, where do I still need help? And most importantly, do I have the means to address those needs at some point throughout my rebuild? Do I have the draft picks needed to draft my next tight end one? Do I have valuable pieces for competitive teams that can lead me more draft capital last year to fill out, a running back slot next year? If I feel like my team is heading enough in that competitive direction, what pieces do I have that don't fit the trajectory that I'm on that I can move for draft capital next year, or proven talent, players that haven't broken out yet, young players with upside remaining, and maybe I get a little draft capital on top as well. Because if you have a lot of holes to fill and you don't really have a lot of means to do that, whether it's via you just don't have the draft capital, you don't have the good players filled in already, that's another sign that we really need to revamp this rebuild and even reconsider the direction we're going in to make sure that we're going to actually get out of this rebuild someday. Overall, it's another great time of year to assess the state of your rebuild. How's the rebuild going? Do you feel good about it? Are you still as far away as you thought? Are you closer than you thought? Or are you maybe further away than you thought originally? Whatever the case is, it's time to make sure the rebuild is on track and make sure you are building a roster that is conducive to league scoring and roster settings and starting allocations. Required starting allocations, that is. If you haven't already used the league's history to your benefit, use this as a loose guide to see if any positions are more favored than others, and build around that accordingly. If you're on Sleeper, you can swipe right to left, select the Leaders tab, filters the stats and any of the previous years, and see how each position group ended up comparatively when you filter to all, which should be the default filter. As an example, if wide receivers score really well, let's say it's a PPR league, and it's a start 3 wide receiver along with 3 flex spots, you better be building that room 10 wide receivers deep and strong wide receivers as well. The quicker you can adjust your rebuilds to be conducive to league settings and things like that, the quicker you will turn your rebuild around. The last bit of advice for rebuilding teams moves to make in the offseason is that not all rebuilding assets need to stay on your team. Basically, if I have a rebuilding asset, let's say a wide receiver with upside that just hasn't broken out yet, but is pretty well liked in the market and the Dynasty community. To throw out a name for the sake of the conversation, Jameson Williams. Now, his situation is very nuanced, having the suspension and everything like that. I get it, and maybe I'm cherry picking a little bit. But just because I have Jameson Williams on my team doesn't mean I'm not looking to move him to upgrade that piece if I can. And that goes for any rebuilding asset or any asset you would consider to be more of a rebuilding asset than a competitive one. But in this example, I would move Jameson Williams for Jahan Dotson in a heartbeat. I think Jameson Williams is a fine player, and I think he'll do great things for NFL offenses. However, that doesn't mean that I think he's going to do anything consistently and impactfully enough over time to garner putting a lot of weight or emphasis or value in what he brings to your fantasy lineup. However, despite a year with injuries and quarterback issues, Jahan Dotson put together a season that was very nice for a rookie player. But as a general rule of thumb, if I'm trying to make this deal, if I'm moving Jameson Williams for Jahan Dotson, I'm not going to send the offer straight up. Because when you go 1-for-1 positionally like that, there's no real argument against them saying, well, you're obviously saying that you just want Jahan Dotson more than you want Jameson Williams, which, hey, I do. But you need to pitch this in a way that you're making them feel like Jameson Williams is the more valued player in the deal, which per DLF's trade analyzer, he is by a smidgen. So to pitch this trade, I would do something along the lines of sending a 24 third along with Jameson Williams for Jahan Dotson and a 24 second. If you haven't had your rookie draft yet, I'm looking to send a lower draft pick with Jameson Williams, like the 212, for Jahan Dotson, and let's say the 206. Just as an example of how I'd pitch that offer to a prospective trade partner. But again, this point isn't meant to be about Jameson Williams or Jahan Dotson necessarily at all. But just when you have a rebuilding asset, don't nail them into your team for the long haul. Things are going to change, situations are going to change, values are going to change to where you can, in my opinion, upgrade somebody like Jameson Williams to Jahan Dotson and maybe even get more value proposition on top. It's just something to keep in mind that not every rebuilding asset is the best asset for your team to have at that given moment, at any given moment, and you need to be open to moving any player at any time for the right value. Well, that is it for the video today. I do hope you all enjoyed. Please leave a like if you did. Comment down below your thoughts on the video itself. Again, as a rebuilding team in the offseason, what are you looking to do and what questions do you have about rebuilding in the offseason? And if you did enjoy the video and you want to see more videos like it, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss another one. And check out this playlist right up here where we dive into all the strategy aspects of how to play Dynasty Fantasy Football. And if you want round-the-clock advice on how to win your Dynasty leagues, patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. A link will be in the description. But hey, that's going to be it for me today, and we'll see y'all in the next one. But until then, Y'all have a good one.